Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this podcast is perfect for you. G'day legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today, James and I are sitting down and we're going to jump straight in and start discussing a very important concept when it comes to hunting the rut or the raw, which is upcoming this March and April. We are going to be discussing everything surrounding buck to doe ratios, what that term actually means. You may have heard it a little bit on the podcast and on our socials, how it impacts your local deer herd. Plus, we're going to be suggesting some tips on managing the buck to doe ratio for improved hunting opportunities wherever you're planning on hunting this rut/raw, or even if you're hunting different species, not a fallow or a red, say it's chital deer up in North Queensland, this is still relevant to you. Whether you're chasing fallow, reds, hog deer, sambar deer, whatever, if it's a deer in Australia, wherever you're planning on hunting, this truly does matter for improved hunting throughout Australia. We're going to conclude the show, as always, with a couple of listener FAQs, which have been sent in. If you would like a question answered on the podcast, then please email us at info@twinelements.com.au. Simply send us an email with the subject line FAQ and we'll get those answered and featured on the podcast. Or you can simply send us a DM on social media to either Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors, James Doumtsis Outdoors, or Twin Elements account, and we will strive to get those answered and featured on a future podcast episode. Without further ado, we will jump into the podcast. Originating in Texas, USA, Numa Outdoors has formulated a durable, breathable, quiet, and comfortable camouflage. Vital for the hunt, their lineup is perfect for concealing you across all terrain, seasons, and pursuits. If you've been paying attention, then you would have seen us across our socials running the Numa lineup. Whether it's at home here in Australia or abroad in the USA hunting for elk, mule deer, and pronghorn, Numa camouflage comes with us. They have a pattern and lineup suitable for every pursuit. If it's early season with hot and humid conditions, then their Renegade lineup is perfect. If you're hunting the rut and temperatures are more frigid and cool, then we recommend trying the Alpha Vertex gear. Start with the merino pullover base layer, which we absolutely love. Then bulk up your kit by adding external layers such as the Alpha Vertex pants, jumper, or vest. For those days where wind chill is a concern and you can't quite get warm, run their puffer jacket, gloves, or beanie and hunt super cozy and comfortable. We are pleased to announce that the Numa range and all their products we have just mentioned are stocked exclusively here in Australia by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. Head into their mega store in Brisbane or smaller store in Hamilton, Victoria to check out the whole range today. Also available via their website www.venturehunting.com.au.
So what is the buck to doe ratio, which we often talk about? And that is, it's a statistic of the number of males compared to the number of females. So if there's one buck and there's one doe in a population in the lowest possible number, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So, the more that gets stretched out due to environmental factors, which is normally mainly around hunting, then we may see one buck and then there may be 5 does. So in a extrapolated or extended out number, you might have a population where there's 100 bucks and 500 does, and then that's still a 1-to-5 ratio. And the further we get from a 1-to-1 ratio, the more impact that has on a population for multiple factors. So generally speaking, the worse we see in terms of rutting behavior. We also see worse genetic traits getting carried through because bucks or stags with lower genetic potential have more opportunity to breed because there's less competition between bucks or stags, and also a worse damage it has for the environment from a conservation point of view. So what we're going to talk about today is why that matters and how you can improve your rut with improving your buck to doe ratio.
Yeah, so a lot of people, I think, get this mistaken with population total numbers, I guess, and where people associate more deer as better hunting opportunities. Oh, I've got a property with 1,000 deer. It's automatically better than a place with 300 deer. And it's just simply not the case. I would much rather hunt a property with 150 bucks and 150 does compared to a place with 150 bucks and 500 does, because yes, you're going to have a lot more, you're going to see a lot more deer, but those deer are just going to see you a lot more. And also, as we said earlier, there are implications with more females on the landscape. One being that the rutting intensity actually decreases with the more females there are compared to bucks. So again, you want a ratio as close to 1-to-1 in terms of really fierce competition. If James and I go to a pub and there's 50 women in there and 50 blokes, to try and get a girl out of that pub and, create a relationship, whatever your intent is going to be a lot more difficult than if there's 3 blokes in there and 100 females. We're not going to have to, put our best foot forward. We can walk by women, and unless they're throwing themselves at us, we may not be inclined to go and pursue it. Whereas, say it's me, James, and 2 other girls, then your work is cut out for you to try and succeed. And I guess in this instance with deer, rut and breed. So that's just one implication of a buck to doe ratio that varies from 1-to-1 or as low as possible.
Another thing that people don't realize is, like what Ayden said, it's a lot. You get to see a lot more deer, but whether you're a bow hunter or a rifle hunter, it's going to be so much more difficult for you to stalk in during the rut, especially, which is going to be the main time when most people are going to be hunting. And what you're going to find is, there may be a buck on a scrape, but if he's got 40 or 50 does around him, then that's going to be significantly harder to go and be successful, even if you can shoot him at 300 meters, than it is going to be, if he's got 10 or 20 does around him, for example. And it also means that when you're moving in there, like especially the big old mature stag or buck or whatever, like if you're constantly bumping deer while you're hunting, like, they learn, and especially during the rut where normally people go away somewhere and they might go somewhere for a week. Like, it only takes 1 or 2 times for you to be continuously bumping deer off a scrape or whatever for them to learn, okay, no, like there's too much hunting pressure here, and they either go quiet or they move to a different area, they move to thicker bush, and it just gets harder and harder for you to get that stag or buck as well.
I think a big one here is generally I associate, hunting the rut as hunting those males that are exhibiting that rutting behavior. And there's certain reasons why we obviously do that. Those males tend to be in a bit of a false sense of security. They're rutting. They're sort of less worried about safety, more worried about passing on their genetics to that next generation. But those does or hinds should, with those species differences, say it's a red deer hind, if she's watched hunters come down from the same ridge where they park their car, walk there every morning, either wind these hinds or, little family mobs and things, and always just try and shoot the stags, never actually takes any hinds. You can imagine some of these hinds getting to the ripe old age of 7, 8, 9, 10, having seen 7 or 10 ruts now, learnt from the hinds before her. They can be really difficult to hunt. And again, if they're not being taken because us as hunters are selecting for males and selecting for that stag that we're trying to pursue, then it just ends up with a skewed ratio where we then start seeing effects over, it might not be year 1 or 2 or year 3 or 4, but by the 5th year, if all we're shooting is the odd male, and say it's only 5 animals off a property and there's 50 hinds that are left to breed, those 50 deer then multiply quite quickly. And in 5 years, the population can really expand. And that's where we start getting a lot more effects. These are obviously feral introduced animals. And even the landowner tolerance, or if it's on public land, the environmental damage that we start seeing, whether it's through rubbing trees, like every stag or buck that's there is going to be rubbing trees. All of those does and fawns are going to be putting extreme pressure on different herbs and pastures and whatnot and forage. So it just really does exacerbate, like the message I think that we're trying to portray here is we should be taking a bit more of a sustainable use sort of approach and just managing these populations a little bit better. And we're just trying to get people to think about, okay, if I'm seeing 1 buck and 10 does, maybe that's my time or my cue to start stepping in and taking a few more does than what I normally would for meat and to be controlling these populations.
And especially when these populations really do get out of control, like it's Ayden mentioned, landowner tolerances and that type of thing. Like, especially fallow deer, it really doesn't take much, especially in sort of these Hunter Valley areas, but all up and down the East Coast, for farmers to get inundated by fallow deer. And that's where, like, you might have a population now, like what Ayden was saying, that you're seeing, nice little mobs of 10 and 20, but it really doesn't take long for those mobs to blow out and be 40 to 60. And so that's where, this rut, we encourage you to think, okay, well, if you and your hunting party go somewhere and you might shoot a couple of stags every year, or, a couple of bucks or whatever, like, are you trying to keep and balance that ratio to that ideal 1-to-1? Because, like most species, when a fawn is born, like, it's generally pretty close to 50-50 between it's going to be a buck or a doe. And so, like, that's the ideal number that we're trying to keep, that 1-to-1. So, like, if you're taking 10 bucks off a property a year, are you taking 10 does, essentially, is what would be encouraging you to try and do. And in trying to keep a population, even and try and keep it from expanding, like, if you've got really good numbers that you're happy with at the moment, and I know, like, every hunter wants more deer on their place, but, like, I would encourage you to even shoot more does or more hinds than stags every year, because, like, survivability, like, in Australia, like, other than shooting and hunting pressure, like, there's not that many things that, wedge tails might smash a few and you might lose some to the odd wild dog or fox. But really, like, survivability of fawns in Australia, like, even when we're in drought here, other than, like, the 2019, 2020 drought sort of thing where it was, like, really, really severe and there's not a blade of grass on the landscape, like, most of the time, the fawn survival rates here in, like, New South Wales and even down to Victoria is going to be, like, really, really good. So that's where, like, you need to manage and treat your population like a fluid dynamic that you really need to invest in and manage. And obviously, there's, like, so many benefits, obviously, from a conservation point of view, but even just filling the freezer for yourself, like, getting on top of the does and hinds is going to keep that freezer full all year round.
What we're going to do now is just talk a little bit more specifically about some of these factors that we've mentioned earlier. So, starting off with one that comes up quite commonly for us as hunters, especially this time of the year, is that perceived sort of rut intensity. So, what we all want, most of us as hunters, I know I'm speaking for myself here, is a very intense rut action come March, April. Like, I want those fallow bucks to be croaking, smashing all their scrapes, really have a lot of territorial traits being displayed. Same comes when it's a red stag. Like, I want there to be a stag in every gully with a couple of hinds, really roaring, fighting, rubbing trees. If there's rival satellite bucks, I want them to be chasing them because there's so, like, much competition based around the few available hinds. I don't want there to be one stag tucked away in a gully with 40 hinds that make it near impossible to get in on him with a bow. And what we're striving for there are ratios that are as close to even, and even obviously being 1-to-1 buck to doe or 1-to-1 male to female. 1-to-2, 1-to-3. These are all what we'd call, low buck to doe ratios or good buck to doe ratios. And again, this results in increased rutting activity. So what we typically see when the ratio is, 1 male to 1 female on the property, exacerbated by, could be 100 deer and 100 does, or 100 bucks, and 100 does, that's still 1-to-1. You're going to see a lot more competition. Again, using that bar analogy earlier, there's going to be a lot more vocalization. Like, every buck is going to be fighting for that doe's attention. Whereas if you've got 10 does and one buck, then that buck sort of got this perceived fantasy of, oh, I've got 10 women around me. They're actually going to want to come to me to be bred because there's not that many of us males around fighting with one another. That also means more daylight movement of deer. You're going to have bucks actively going and seeking out that one estrus doe. Say you go to a scrape and there's a doe coming up to that buck scrape. There might be 2 or 3 rivals that aren't actually with the other does that aren't in season, purely because if there's only 100 deer on the hill, 50 of them are bucks, 50 of them are does, and you've got a couple of does coming in season at the same time, then that's going to attract a lot more of those males. So you might get 10 bucks fighting over one doe. Which, again, you can imagine 10 blokes at a bar trying to talk to one woman. It's going to get pretty heated pretty quickly.
If you're an Aussie hunter, you already know those early starts are brutal. Rolling out of the swag at 4 a.m, freezing cold, eyes half shut, and all you want is a coffee that actually hits. That's why I use Dog and Gun coffee. Roasted here in Australia, Dog and Gun makes coffee for people who live outdoors. Hunters, fishers, campers, the whole lot. Their brews are strong, smooth, and pack enough punch to get you moving up the mountain before first light. And the best part, you can get it as beans, grounds, or lightweight instant sachets that actually taste like real coffee when you're on the mountain. Whether you're heading bush for a week or just brewing up home before work, Dog and Gun keeps you fueled for whatever adventure you're chasing. Check them out at dogandguncoffee.com and use code TWIN10 to get $10 off your first order and upgrade your camp coffee today. Another issue that you find with really poor buck to doe ratios is normally the age structure of the males is really poor as well. So like we said, like normally, you know, it's because there's been over harvesting or more hunting of the males in the species. And essentially what you find is that there's a lot, you know, the oldest buck, for example, might only be 4 or 5 year old buck. Like you don't really have that many bucks that are just like going out the back door, you know, where you've got that 7, 8, 9 year old bucks, and same with red stags. Like, and people generally, you know, they're trying to shoot the biggest buck they can find, which is fair enough. But if you're constantly shooting them when they're 3, 4, and 5, like you're never going to get that 5, 6, 7 year old buck where you're going to have, you know, more mass, you know, bigger, more dominant animals. And every animal is going to be able to breed because there's so many does on the mountain. And then you're not going to see the actual genetic potential of these animals because there's plenty of them that missing a bay time, for example, or whatever, as younger, especially in like red stags that will then grow through and actually have them when they're older. And people will cull an animal, especially, you know, when they're 2, 3, 4, because they don't have the genetics. But really it's just that they're young and they haven't actually grown into, I guess, their potential yet. And so making sure that you're, like, if you've got that good buck to doe ratio or male to female ratio, then you're actually going to have then an age structure of animals where instead of shooting them when they're 4 or 5 or whatever, you're allowing them to reach their full potential and shooting them at, you know, 6, 7, 8, which is important because then if you just keep taking the cream of the crop, if that for you is a 4-year-old animal, then it's always going to be a 4-year animal. And like, not to say that, you know, the odd 5 or 6-year-old might sneak through every while, but it's like sometimes you've got to be patient. And even as hunters, like that's where it's like it's more important to go and manage the herd as a whole. And like you'd be better off shooting a heap of deer off the landscape, freeing up nutritionally some feed to get better antlers quality as well, but also just freeing up so that, you know, you can leave some more of these bucks or stags on the mountain and let them get older and let them mature, which is obviously then also going to produce better trophy potential and heads for you in the future.
I think one of the biggest things as well that affects like that age class and the structure of age when it comes to the males is just like a wider viewpoint of the stakeholders in the area. And when I talk about stakeholders, I'm obviously talking about hunters because we're obviously managing deer herds, but then that comes across whether it's public land, for example, and you've got government agencies that are saying, no, these are feral deer, we want them totally culled and eradicated, then that's going to put a massive dent in any, you know, I guess, managing for better hunting and managing for trophy potential and managing for healthier deer herds, because you can be a trophy hunter that still wants really good environmental conditions, really good landowner conditions where they can run stock efficiently without having, you know, decreased pasture availability because there's 1,000 deer in the landscape. But one big thing is also, I guess, like as stakeholders, is even as small sections of private property, you need to have a good amount of like faith that, okay, James is hunting on property 1. He hates deer. He's got, you know, the same population, because we can't pretend that these deer obviously live on my place and then they don't go through these invisible boundaries or cattle fences and whatnot. And none of my deer go into James's place. They're all going to survive and whatnot. But if I know that next door James shoots 1,000 deer off his place a year, like, and shoots indiscriminately, males, females, whatever, if it's a deer, it dies on his place, then it's going to be very difficult for me to manage, you know, my property B, which is as the crow flies 500 meters away. Do you know what I mean? Those deer are interchangeable. I can have the best intentions of, I'm only going to shoot does for the next few years and any bucks that are older than what I think is 5 years of age. But that's all nearly pointless to a degree if James is next door shooting every single deer, or if they only target males and they go, it's a spiker, yep, I'm going to shoot it, and don't touch the females. So all of these different, I guess, ethics and values on sustainability and population dynamics come into play, and that's where it's difficult to achieve. One, on public land, it's probably nearly impossible, and then two, on small sections of private property, it can get really difficult as well.
Another point that we often see is people shooting spikers during the rut. It's a favorite, and we're not here to, discourage people in the sense that, like, Ayden and I are very much about progression in hunting. So if you haven't shot a deer before and a spiker walks past you, we want you to go and shoot that spiker if you want to shoot it. We're not here to bash on you guys or girls. The thing that we see all the time, though, is people like, I need meat for the freezer, so I'm going to go and shoot a spiker. And especially we hear all the time where it's like, okay, it's a low genetic spiker because it's got little spikes. And I mean, this hasn't been done in Australia, but I can extrapolate it from the US, where they've taken and watched like the full progression of cast antlers from caught whitetail deer. And, whether it's a big spike or a small spike really doesn't show the genetic potential of that whitetail. And so we can only extrapolate that back to reds and sambar and everything else here, where it's like, just because it's got small spikes now, it probably just means that it's a late born fawn. And so it has its first set of spikes that it's grown is small, but that doesn't necessarily mean that its potential in the future is going to be small. And so that doesn't mean its potential in the future is going to be small. And so instead of shooting that spiker because it's easy and it's going to come into a hind call or a doe call, we encourage you here to try and actually shoot a hind or a doe, because as hopefully you've got the message by now, it's going to significantly improve your rut in years to come and try and keep that ratio 1-to-1. Whereas even though you're shooting a spiker now and you, it's fine, like it's not going to impact it. Well, it is going to impact it because it's still a male. So in 6 or 7 years' time, that is the male that you want to shoot. And if you're doing that every year and you're shooting 1 or 2 spikers, well, that's still 1 or 2 males less that, is going to be impacting the population. It doesn't take, especially in a small population, like it doesn't take that long for that difference to start really, moving and occurring. Like, it's especially like populations that are just starting out where there might only be 30 deer. Well, if you're shooting at like a trophy buck every year and you're shooting a spiker, well, there's all of a sudden, just say it was 15 and 15. Well, that year it's 13 and 15. You know what I mean? And then the population doubles and all of a sudden you quickly move away from that 1-to-1. So if we can inspire you guys, hopefully, to go and, shoot a doe or shoot a hind and, to be honest, try and shoot as many as you can. It's not, and also see it as a challenge. Like, it's not easy to do. Like the does are way harder than the bucks and the spikers to shoot, and the hinds during the rut. Like, you can call the bucks and stuff in easy, but generally 9 times out of 10, if you haven't got that across in previous podcasts too, like it's the doe that's going to spot you as you walk in on the scrape, not the buck. Like, the buck's going to be croaking his ass off doing loops on that one hot doe, but it's generally her yearling or another doe that's off to the side that's going to be the one that spots you. So if you can get in there and try and, shoot a doe and stuff, you're just leveling the playing field for you in the future, but doing so much for your hunting and conservation as well on a place by trying to get that doe or hind.
Another one that I see people sort of suggest is like, it's just a spiker. It would have taken another 5 years to be that older animals, but I'm leaving all the 2, 3, 4-year-olds. But if you shoot 10 spikers off a place every year, that's 10 2-year-olds next year, 10 3-year-olds the year after, 10 4-year-olds. And there is, all this natural selection where, again, that you might be shooting just spikers and just old deer. But then a kilometre down the road, when there are bucks that are 2 and 3 years old going and velveting somewhere on a crop, someone goes, I'm just going to go and shoot the 3 and 4-year-olds because they're fatter and I can enter them in the chiller box and process them. They're a good carcass yield, these sorts of things. So there are all these criteria on different age class. And you might think that, I'm just shooting spikers and I'm just shooting older bucks. But then that herd that you're hunting all the bucks are getting smashed. Whereas it's a lot easier to just say, you know what, I'm not shooting a male unless I really want it as a trophy. And again, I understand that this is a bit of an not elitist sort of mentality, but through, like James and I said, like this whole podcast is underpinned on not seeing deer as a pest that we just want to exterminate, because then you're probably listening to the wrong people, the wrong podcast. Like, we see deer as a resource that can be managed and utilized by landowners, by hunters, by people in Australia. Because as far as I'm concerned, like, we're both veterinarians, we work with cattle on the daily. They're a pest species. They've been introduced. They've got hard hooves. They're, damaging to the ecosystem. But there's also very much a management and sustainability viewpoint put on cattle here in Australia. There's also a market for them as an animal that people make money off. And deer can be said it's the exact same. Whether it's 50 deer or 100 deer, 1,000 deer, it doesn't really matter. But they are an animal that I think is here to stay. It's just to what extent. And that's where I think my message in this podcast would be, it's a lot easier to get 50 deer over the line to a landowner than 500, or keeping 500. Like, if a property owner starts going, oh yeah, we didn't mind the deer when we saw 100 of them, but now that there's 1,000, they're really, really impacting how we graze our sheep, or they're competing with our cattle, or they're really smashing up that belt of saplings that we were planted as a bit of a windbreak. But that's where I'm saying you can have the same hunting opportunities, if not better, with 100 deer than you can with 300. And it's also going to benefit relationships with the landowner, with the environment. You're going to have a better age class, better rut intensity, all these sorts of things. So this is merely just not, you have to shoot X Douglas score of fallow buck every year, or X age of fallow buck. But this is simply a thought-provoking exercise as to, okay, this is what I'm seeing year to year to year. And if I don't shoot any females on my place, now suddenly the property owner is going, oh, you know what, mate, we're actually introducing Scott from down the road because he comes in with a thermal and shoots 50 does for us. And we actually appreciate that a lot more than you saying, yeah, I'm a really mad keen hunter and shooting 4 spikers a year off the place.
And I was going to say, that's a huge thing as well that we see. Like, we hear about people that are, managing places for 10 or 20 years and they've had sole access, and then, they invite someone in, and then someone just goes and shoots in terms of their views, shoots the shit out of the place, generally with a thermal, which, like, we obviously, I think we've spoken about before on the podcast, like, we don't really use thermals for everyday hunting, but as a tool for culling and managing a herd, I think it's like, we don't do it, but like, we haven't used one, but it's a very effective tool. And, I'd encourage people to do it. But yeah, you hear about these guys that, they start losing their access because they go there every year during the rut and just shoot whatever, $5 off there a year. But other than that, they don't really, the cocky or whatever doesn't hear from them. And then soon, especially fallow deer, like red deer, typically speaking, like, they're a pretty vulnerable animal. Like, it's pretty rare that you hear about like huge, massive populations, other than probably southeast Queensland, like all up and down the east coast. Like, they get targeted pretty heavily. Whereas fallow deer, like, as soon as fallow deer even pop their head up in a certain area, like, it honestly doesn't take too long and they're a pest. Like, there's places now that I rarely see does, but already whenever I get the opportunity to shoot a doe on there, I'll shoot one. Because, like, especially as a bow hunter, like, we're talking about me only shooting a couple of does a year. Like, on the bigger places where I'm trying to manage the population, like, that's where I'm just getting a rifle and going and shooting them as much as I can, because, like, a bow's just not effective enough. But on these places that I'm starting to see fallow deer pop up, and, like, even talking to the farmers, like, oh yeah, it's only been like the last couple of years, I'm already trying to shoot does, not to let the population grow, because it takes nothing for them to just, for some reason, like, they're just so good at surviving and just the population exploding, that in these places, like, we're talking about not that long, like 10 to 20 years, all of a sudden there's heaps of fallow deer there. And the problem with that, especially on some of these places where they're like my red deer blocks, is farmers, like, most farmers aren't very good at, determining, okay, no, that's a big fallow, or that's a big red, or, whatever. It's just like, they just see deer and they see competition for their stock, which, as Ayden said, is the way that they make money. So if like once they might have 20 or 30 reds on there that they're very happy with. But all of a sudden, once there's 5 or 10 fallow there, if that's not managed, that quickly becomes 70 to 100 fallow. And they were happy with the 30 reds, but then all of a sudden they're seeing 130 deer, of which they never shot deer before, but now there's 130, of which there's 100 fallow and there's 30 red. And that's when they just start shooting the shit out of the place. And so that's where I encourage people, especially with fallow, you really need to, like, even if you've got a small population now, like unless you've hunted the same place for 20 or 30 years and you don't think the population's changed, it's not expanding. From my experience all up and down the East Coast, like as soon as fallow get a foot in the door, they're like running and the population is growing, right? So that's where you really, if you've got a nice spot now that only has that 50 to 100 fallow, just say on 5,000 acres or whatever, which is a great number to hunt, and like 50 to 100 fallow across that sort of country, like you're not seeing them, you'll see them all the time, but they're not like there's like 5 here and 2 here or whatever. That's really good hunting dynamics and really good hunting opportunities. But it doesn't take long for that 100 to become 500. And then that's when, the farmer's thinking about, oh, maybe we're going to chop a shoot, or, we're going to get, Tomo or Scotty in to go and shoot the shit out of the place with a thermal. So just things to sort of get you ticking over in your mind and I guess increase your need and desire to want to go and shoot some of these does.
Born out of necessity, Day 6 designs and builds specialised equipment for hunters. Their arrows are bomb-proof and consistent. I've been running their 275 spine HD shafts for the past year or so. In that time, I've taken big game animals such as bull elk, roaring red stags, Asiatic water buffalo, wild boar, and more. For whatever the critter, I'm confident sending a Day 6 shaft their way. This split between the usual 250 and 300 spine shaft is perfect for the 150 grain broadhead that I run. Coming in at 11.8 grains per inch, my total setup comes in at around 560 grains total. Based on countless pass-throughs with some obscure shot angles, this setup is perfect for all game here in Australia and beyond. Head to the Day 6 website to check out their range, or if you want to check out the Day 6 range in person here in Australia, then Venture Hunting is now stocking their products in-store and online. There are so many things that we're talking about there that we are thinking about, or hopefully we're starting to think about too, but this is just another real-world thought-provoking exercise here with what I'm seeing currently up at where I run my chittle deer hunts up in North Queensland with spotted safaris. Is we've had probably 3 or 4 really good years of rainfall during the dry season. So sort of May, end of May, June, when it's normally quite dry, we've actually had, a couple hundred mils of rain. And what that has done is, one, just mean that cover that normally starts drying up, getting a bit more brittle, a bit more scarce. Some of these fawns are potentially dying, getting predated on by wedge-tailed eagles, dingoes, this sort of thing. Those fawns are surviving. But secondly, a lot of those deer that, we've probably got 500 to 750 deer on the place that I have access to currently. And when the property owner sees 20 or 30, drives a K down the road, 20 or 30, 20 or 30, drives a bit further, another 20 or 30, he goes, oh yeah, we've got 100 or so deer, that's all good. They're sort of spread out, they're happy, they're enjoying, a wider, more vast resource, which is the property. But the second that dries up, so over the last 3 or 4 years, I'm obviously trying to shoot quite a lot of hinds on the place, manage the population. But what I can't account for is when that dries up. So say this year, it suddenly goes from 3 or 4 years of what we'd say is abundance, really good rain during the dry season. Once that dries up and those deer, which have been breeding, spread out over a really big area, start coming in around his house where it's well irrigated, there's good water in the creek. Some of the lagoons have good water. There's good feed on all these lagoon edges. As it dries up and gets, more scarce and less abundant in surrounding areas, suddenly there's mobs of 100 deer, and this property owner goes, holy shit, what is going on? We have a deer problem. And it might not be that drastic in a lot of examples. It might be, 10 fallow deer is now 30 in a mob. But I guarantee you that property owner is going, shit, that population has, that mob that lives there, and, Susie comes down with her little fawn, and it started off with Susie, Daisy, and blah, 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 and there was 10 fallow there. coming through the gap in the fence every morning while they had coffee and or morning tea or afternoon tea or whatever. Oh shit, now there's Susie and that one, and there's suddenly 30 fallow doing the same thing that they were doing a year ago. That's very noticeable. That's a 3 times, increase in numbers in that one little group alone. And it's not until, again, the farmer's trying to rest a paddock for hay, or they're saving a paddock for their sheep come the end of the year, or for lambs or cattle or whatever, or weaners. And suddenly, instead of 20 fallow that don't really utilize it because there's feed everywhere, there's 100 fallow coming and hitting this crop, hitting this little wheat field, whatever it may be. That's when there's an issue that arises. And I'm experiencing this with the chiddle deer at the moment. And that's why I put such a great emphasis on, again, going, okay, what is my ideal carrying capacity on the landscapes? And I just treat the deer basically like stock. They're completely free, 100% free range, wild ranging animals. But you do have to have this, okay, these are my animals that I'm managing on this property with this property owner for this ideal outcome. Again, taking into landowner desires, environmental, well-being as stakeholders and stewards of the landscape here in Australia. I love native animals and want, there to be good pastures and all this type of stuff. And then obviously want him to have plenty of feed available for his cows, water and sites like that not being degraded by erosion, trees not being smashed and massacred by rutting chiddle stags. So there's so many factors that you've got to take into account. So there are so many factors that you have to take into account. And a lot of it actually comes back to that doe management or that female management, making sure that you have an ultimate population that is matching that carrying capacity. So if you sit there and go, okay, the landscape can have 1,000 deer on it before the property owner actually says, nah, we've got too many deer, then what are the benefits of having 1,000? If you run it at 1,000, you then have to say, okay, there's going to be, let's say the ratios, there's 300 males, 700 females. Of those 700 females, let's say 90% of them are having fawns. So there's 630 fawns hitting the ground next year. How the hell are you going to manage 630 new additions to 1,000 animal herd? Do you know what I mean? That's 1,600 animals on the landscape within 1 year of when you said, no, I'm managing it at 1,000 is my carrying capacity before the property owner cracks the shits. And when you start thinking of that, and in those sort of real world numbers, especially, you've then got to factor in sickness, disease, mortality rates, all these sorts of things, how many you're taking. But in nature, animals want to reproduce, and there will be times when there's droughts. And of those 600 new recruits and additions that if they do survive, say of the 600, in an ideal world, we have 300 males, 300 females, like new fawns hitting the ground. Those 300 males and young fawns that turn into spikers might displace, and they might end up half of them next door, to the east, half of them might walk 10 Ks and go to the west. This is talking more specifically probably about chiddle deer and stuff like that in bigger properties. But what I'm trying to get you to think is, okay, if I've got 100 deer on my place and I've currently got, or a carrying capacity of 100 deer, and I've currently got what I think is an estimated population at 90, which I'll never get truly accurate because we're not biologists from America that are doing intense biological surveys with accurate data consistently. We're just doing boots to the ground, which is important, which is good. We're using what the property owner is saying, where he's seeing them, all these type of, anecdotal, I guess, evidence, which counts for something because at least we're sort of biased to a degree, but we are invested in trying to be stakeholders and manage this population. But let's just say, again, with that example, we've got 100 deer carrying capacity on the landscape. As soon as I start hitting 70 or 80 anticipated deer in the population, I would really be trying to cull, going, okay, of that, what's my buck to doe ratio? Okay, I have 50 does out of that 70 animals. 50 does, most of them are going to have fawns. Let's say 90% have fawns. I've got 45 fawns being recruited this year. Let's say 10% die of natural causes, winter, predation, stillbirths, whatever. There's a few being reduced, but most of them being deer in most landscapes in Australia are extremely adaptable, extremely good survival rates. So there's another, say, 40 deer adding to my population. That means I've got to take automatically 10 deer a year just to get to 100. But then next year, if I've gone from 70 to 100 deer, you're dealing with a whole different number. Do you know what I mean? And that's why it's very important to go, this is the number that I want. This is what's best for me, the property owner, environment, hunting conditions. And now I'm going to actively try and really etch away at keeping that, again, sustainable being the key word. And if that means that you can't shoot, one buck and 5 does a year, and you need to get a few mates in, or you reach out to a young hunter and say, mate, come, you haven't shot any deer? Come, and we're going to really put some time and effort in the off season to shooting 10 does. I'd rather you pull the trigger because it doesn't excite me as much, but I recognize that this work really needs to be done. And that's stuff that as hunters, I think we really need to get better with, because it seems from my perspective that it's either extremely tight management with me, my brother, my dad, and 5 close mates, just say. Not that that's a bigger circle than what we typically do. We often, to be honest, recruit paying clients in a lot of our aspects, because we like to pass on our knowledge and get people to come up and do this. But what a lot of people do is it'll be them, their dad, and 5 mates, or nothing. And then on the other end, it's a pest roo shooter that comes in and shoots 100 deer. Like there's no, extend that property access to, 5 mates that are going to come and shoot 5 deer, take them home in the cool room. The next guy's going to come and shoot 5 deer, take them home in the cool room, and do that work over the less desirable hunting period, but do some real, true, like boots to the ground population management. It's sort of letting it go, and then you've got this massive problem where the property owner's like, oh no, actually Macca's coming and he's got his roof racks and he's going to shoot 50 deer, and either leave him in the paddock or take him and try and actually make a resource out of him.
And just on a side note as well, like another group that we probably haven't spoken about here too is like sambar in the high country, which is another big topic of debate, especially with, all the chopper shooting and stuff that's been going on. And whenever choppers are involved, whether it's, chital deer at Charters Towers, the Hunter Valley and fallow and reds, or, now sambar in the high country, like everyone jumps up and down and always, complains and blames the greenies and stuff. But I would turn it back on us and say, this has happened because of a failure for us to manage the population. And like, yes, greenies want to go in there and like they hate hunters and all that type of stuff that we love saying. But it's like, how many of these guys, like they'll go in there and stuff and everyone's trying to shoot a massive sambar deer or whatever like that. But it's like, how many of these guys go in there and actually shoot a heap of hinds, or a heap of does or whatever. And it's the same with like hound crews are great because they're indiscriminate in the sense of they often just shoot everything on a hound. Whereas like there are so many hunters that go in there up into the high country and like, they don't, especially I guess rifle guys, like you don't want to ring a shot out to shoot a hind because that's going to ruin that whole valley system. But then it's like, okay, well that's okay. But then when the population gets out of control because of that, and then the means is to get thermal guys in there that just go and don't care and they just go and shoot everything, or to get a chopper in there that go in there and shoot everything. It's like, I guess I'd say we've had the opportunity to have management input and we've let it slip so far, then that's when, I guess what you would call extreme circumstances or measures have to get put in place. And so that's where if you want to, as a stakeholder, have, more opportunity and more input on managing a population, whether it be on public land or private, it's just like, it starts now. And then if you let it get to the point where it needs to be chopper shot or something like that, it's like, don't jump up and down and scream then. It's just like you've had 5 or 10 years and failed to do so and actually, implement an action or a strong enough management plan that then, these extreme measures get put into place. And I'll jump on and sort of go into, like, this was actually a Facebook post that we picked up from Hunting Australia from someone that was, quite passionate, I guess, about deer as a whole. But they said, don't shoot hinds. If there's not one in them, there's one on them, as in fawns. It comes down to a moral decision, but the consequences are real. Of course, they are feral, vermin, introduced species mob won't agree. We are so lucky to have such a valuable game species available to us. They should be respected and appreciated, in my opinion. See, for Ayden and I, we agree with, and we can obviously see the passion that this guy has. And we see it often when people go in and, generally it is a roo shooter or someone that's very competent where they've got a a back of a car where there might be 50 deer hung up. And, you see these type of comments and that type of thing, but it's almost like a necessary evil. Like if we're going to call ourselves conservationists, then you do need to manage these animals, and doing it through managing females is going to be the best way of doing it. And so if there's someone that's got 50 deer hung up on the back of, a car or, roof racks or whatever, then for them to shoot 50, there's a lot more out there than 50. Like they didn't go in and shoot a whole population, most likely. Like they've gone and shot 50 out of 1,000. And if they're trying to do that, like most of the time, the problems start where roo shooters may want to shoot the males rather than the females because they obviously get paid more for them. But if that's where someone's gone in there and shot 50 does, then they've done a huge thing for the population. And that's where, as hunters, we need to not badmouth these people and actually sort of encourage it really and have that change of thought. Because like I said, if we're not the ones as hunters that are managing populations, then that's when, more extreme measures like people that just come in and shoot every deer or choppers are going to be the ones that are going to do it instead of us.
Yeah, and I think for a bit of context with that Facebook post, that was in relation to another hunter had actually posted a photograph of a dead Sam behind that he had legally, ethically shot, very humane from the reports of the story, had shot a hind, and then as walking up to the hind, because it was in a bit of brush, had again identified it was a hind, clean ethical shot in the lungs, dropped it on the spot with a high caliber rifle, gets over there, and a fawn is about 10 yards away that barked him, and he sort of sat there going, shit, do I leave this or do I shoot it? And he elected to actually shoot the fawn just because he decided that it was probably still dependent on the hind. And it just got, admittedly from him, he was like, I wish I had knew that fawn was there because I ethically wouldn't have shot it to put it, in a position where he then had to choose whether to shoot, the fawn as well. If he had known it was a mum and fawn, even though they're a pest species, even though he's a hunter, even though he wanted meat, all that type of stuff, he acknowledged, I'm not an animal. I'm not there to cause undue suffering to, this majestic, animal that we do respect more to that point that person shared on Facebook. But in response to that person's comment, just blatantly saying, don't shoot hinds. If there's not one on them, there's one in them. That's just such again, I understand the viewpoint, but it's so naive in the sense of, okay, we as hunters don't shoot that hind. And again, ideally you shoot that hind in 4 months when the fawn's weaned or of an age where it can, go off by itself. But in this instance, he's shot the hind, he's acknowledged there's a fawn, and he's shot the fawn, and he packed out both and has meat now in the freezer of those deer. So he's removed 2 deer from the Australian bush when they're a feral animal. I think that's a great outcome. He's done it as ethically as he could. My response would be shooting a hind with a fetus in the uterus is the best practice in our opinion, and that's coming from us as veterinarians to avoid, I guess, what's occurred where there's this young fawn on the ground. But again, in a natural world, most fallow deer will rut in March, April. 7 months later, around December, most fallow deer, does, will have their fawn in conjunction when, in spring, there's the most feed available to them, the most cover for when those fawns hit the deck, the most feed for when those does need to be lactating, feeding, growing a fawn. There's huge metabolic demands there. All of this is timed perfectly. So in an ideal world, most hunters are going out there in June, July through till probably about November. You might be cutting a bit close and shooting does when they're either early pregnant through to moderately heavy pregnant. And again, it's not perfect, but they're a feral animal that at some point in their lifetime needs to be shot, to be managed as a game animal, as a pest animal, as an animal on a landscape, as part of an ecosystem. And that's where you're never going to get the perfect, no harm done, no, ethically perfect situation. But what we can do is prepare ourselves and have our rifle shooting straight. Have a time when you go, you know what? No, I'm going to go out now and I know where the girls are going to be and I'm going to be able to get my car to that point, get my legs and backpack to that point, shoot a hind, shoot a second hind, shoot a third hind over as many trips or whatever, and get all the meat out as best as possible, not just shooting them and leaving them ideally. But if that's what it comes to, we need to get better as hunters as saying, like, we do need to manage this population. Having the attitude of, don't shoot a single hind or don't shoot any females, grow the population, like they're got to be respected and maintained, is incorrect. Like it's just, they are a feral animal. They have their pros and their cons, and you're talking about people that love them. I've got a guided chital deer hunting business, so I obviously have an invested interest in wanting deer on the landscape where I am, but I also shoot hundreds of hinds a year just to manage a population. There's definitely a middle ground to this, and I think it's hard, again, because in Australia, it's not like America where we have a governing body telling us, like, James, you get one tag this year if you're lucky on a male and one tag on a female. It's not, you shoot a stag or you're a private property owner, you get one male tag and 4 female tags because we've identified that this region has an overpopulation of females and we've done these biological surveys, and that's what's going to be best for hunting opportunities, landowner opportunities, environmental opportunities, all this type of stuff. We don't have that here in Australia. We have any availability for Joe Blow to just go out in the bush and shoot 10 males and totally neglect his opportunities to shoot females and manage that population. So again, there's no perfect world. What we're saying now might be of total, no relevance to you if you're on a place in the Hunter Valley and there's a vineyard and the property owner goes, anything that is brown with hair that is not a cow or any livestock needs to be shot, eradicated, exterminated from my property. Then this podcast is, obviously, hopefully got some bits to it, but you're not going to be sitting there going, oh yeah, it's a 3-year-old deer, let's leave it till it's 5 because it's going to have better impacts for the population. Instead, we'll shoot 3 does. That's sort of pointless to you. You need to be doing what the landowner says and shooting all the deer. But if you do have the opportunity, like we are fortunate enough to do in our, many, many years of hunting, and have properties where we can have relationships with property owners, we sort of obviously love deer. We sort of look for these properties where there's a few deer, there's a sustainable population. We can sort of manage it with the property owners. We get a lot of property owners that send us photos of deer. Hey, I like this. I saw this buck. How old do you think he is? How long do you think he is? Or, mate, we also, on the other hand, get messages, come the dry season, mate, I've been seeing mobs of 30 deer. I think it's time to come, bring some mates, bring a cool room and come and shoot 50 of them. And you have to be ready with, the means to do that to make sure that we're managing these effectively.
So just wrapping it up and final thoughts, you would have heard us, probably go around and hit a couple of these points, but just stressing the importance of buck to doe ratio, because we've had so many questions throughout, the years on this podcast, people asking about it, that 1-to-1 ratio, improving rutting, improving age structures that ultimately lead to better long-term management of deer, on your properties and make for better, relationships with your property owners, and also just for the environment from a conservation point of view. Like them, obviously, there's not many places that don't have any stock on there. So you've got deer competing with stock. The stock are always going to win, but at least if you can manage the numbers to a sustainable level, you're going to have happier property owners. You're going to get better trophy potential, and it's just going to work out way better for you from a hunting perspective as well.
Bringing target precision to hunting camp, Option Archery makes specialist hunting gear. Their quivalizers are one of our favourite bits of kit. You would have seen us running these for the past few years across all of our adventures, whether in Australia or abroad. The quivalizer is an extremely unique 2-in-1 stabilizer combined arrow quiver, cutting weight with its clever 2-in-1 design. Their option sights are versatile in this regard also, offering both single or multi-pin sight housings within the same sight. I run the Option 4S sight. That's one single pin sight paired with the 3 fixed pin options within the sight housing. As currently constructed, I can easily shoot 20, 30, 40 or 50 metres with the fixed pins present. or simply flip them out of the way and utilize the single pin slider. My slider allows me to shoot from 20 all the way out to 80 if desired and covers absolutely every scenario. Have a bedded elk at 60 and need the single pin clarity? Use that option. Have a red stag running into a hind call and not sure where he'll pull up? Use the multi-pin sight and be covered from 5 to 50 meters. We love these incredible products from Option Archery and know you will too. Shop their products today by checking out their website. Rightio, well, it's that time of the show where we are going to jump in and answer a couple of FAQs that have been sent in to us by our valued listeners. If you have a question for either James or I that you want answered, please email us with the subject line FAQ to info@twinelements.com.au, or you can simply DM us at Twin Elements, Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors, or James Doumtsis Outdoors on our socials, and we will strive to answer them and get them featured on future episodes. So question number one is probably less of a question, but more of a comment from a listener. A little while back, we posted a few photos of some water buffalo. I think we posted some of chital deer, and this listener, Ben Summers, wrote in and just gave us a bit of a comment saying, this is awesome. We essentially need more of this. He also said, more specifically to the rut and the raw that's coming up, could you please provide some front-on shot placement examples for both red and fallow deer? So this isn't necessarily us answering a question, but more notifying you guys that are our listeners that we will be doing that in the lead up to the rut. Obviously, front-on shots require a lot of consideration, just with decreased shot angles, more chance for contact with bone and things like that. But also can be extremely effective if you know how to do that. So that's something that we're going to definitely do. Keep an eye out on our Twin Elements Instagram page.
So this next question, sadly, we don't have who it came in from, but they said morning or afternoon hunts. What do you gents prefer?
Personally, from my perspective, I am definitely a morning person in general, as a general statement. I find that one of the benefits of the morning is just that time aspect. Often you've got all day, I guess, to hunt. So say you see that red stag go up with his hinds into a gully. You've then got information for the next, most likely 12 hours as to where he is roughly. It's similar in the afternoons when they're still moving. They're often just doing things in reverse. So, in the morning they're going from feeding to bedding, afternoons from bedding to feeding a lot of the time. But what I dislike about afternoons, and it's sort of this hasty sort of rush that I find a lot of the time, is that those animals are moving from sort of their bedding areas to feeding, and what happens is you might see them, but unless you know exactly where they're going and have the place really, really, really dialed, you sort of, especially as a bow hunter, I find, run out of light. So what I do like about, I guess, afternoons is that you can do it as a bit more of an ambush, and often, again, cheating with this answer, I like morning hunts better because I can plan for that hunt. Okay, I've seen a red stag go up into that gully. Can I kill him now? Do I have to wait till the thermals, change and start going up the hill, or, switching to those midday, afternoon sort of thermals? If that's the case, I'll go up and around, get the wind right, get the thermals right, drop in on him while he's bedded. When he repositions or does what they do during the middle of the day, I'll kill him there as a bow hunter. Like, I have heaps of time. But I also, in a morning hunt, can identify, they've come out of there, nothing's changed. When the thermals are right, I'm going to go and hunt him this evening. What I really dislike about afternoon hunts is that, and I find this with chital deer up north, red deer, fallow deer, you'll run out of light, and a lot of the time I'll try and do the right thing and be like, okay, I don't think I can kill him in that position this afternoon. I'll try and have some restraint. I'm not being lustful. I'm not being hasty. I'm not trying to wind him, scare him if I don't think I can kill him. But then I've got 12 hours of darkness where that buck or stag or whatever can literally move anywhere on the mountain. It can move over a whole ridge line, a whole gully. So you get back there the next morning thinking, I put him to bed there, nothing's changed. But you don't know a car went through there, another hunter went through there, a wild dog went through there, that the next day that someone's mustering that paddock or whatever. Even a doe came in on heat. He was just walking the ridge, found that doe in estrus and followed her to a kilometre away. And to find one specific buck, again, a mature buck that we've spoke about this whole podcast, in those situations can be extremely challenging when it goes from evening to the next day. And that's why I think personally I prefer morning hunts, but we'll see what James has to say, because I'm sure he'll have, other opinions.
So yeah, I definitely agree. Like when it comes to the rut, reds and fallow, and really anything that calls, like even rooster and chittle, like I would say I'm a morning hunter, because like what Ayden said, you've got all the time in the world. You've got plenty of opportunity to make something happen. And especially for us, where we are very much like midday hunters, like whether it's the rut or any time, like our morning hunt generally goes to like 2:00 in the arvo. So yeah, you get that opportunity where if something's calling before the sun even comes up, you could be on or closing in on an animal to then have a really good opportunity. So you're almost using the inverse, where you're using the cover of darkness to get yourself in there. Whereas with afternoon hunts, like what Ayden said, and it's pretty obvious, you run out of light. The only two exceptions I find for this is hunting sambar deer and hunting pigs. So I love afternoon hunting for both of those animals. And if I had to pick one, I'd only hunt the afternoons for them, purely because whenever I've ever hunted sambar, and especially hunting big boars, I always find that they're already in the thick stuff and they're already in cover before first light. Like they've had all night to feed. And then if they haven't filled themselves up in 12 hours, they just do. So they're already in the thick stuff. So those are the two examples where I find I actually get more time in the afternoons to try and shoot a big boar or shoot, shoot a sambar, to be honest, than in the mornings. The only exception with the pigs, to be honest, is when it's either really hot and I like hunting them in the middle of the day, or with pigs if it's like negative in the negatives, in which case I also like hunting them in the morning, because then as soon as that sun hits the hill, you know exactly, and I guess it could be for sambar too, but like if it's -3 overnight, you know that as soon as that sun hits the hill and starts warming up, everything's going to be standing in the sun, and then it gives you an opportunity to find them and then obviously have more time to stalk them. So there is always, I guess little nuances and what you prefer and stuff like that, little variables. But as a whole, morning for everything. But there's a few little things that you don't mind the afternoon dash for, mainly being pigs and sambar.
Alrighty, perfect. Thank you very much, Jimmy. That wraps up today's podcast. As all of you legends are hearing this, we have just released our Bow Hunting the Rut series over on our YouTube channel. That is an epic red stag hunt with a little bit of fallow, boar and billy goat footage dropping in the back end of that series. That series drops every Wednesday evening from 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the Twin Elements YouTube channel. So please continue to like, comment, subscribe, show your support over there on YouTube. It's growing really rapidly. A lot of these videos are getting some really good recognition, which is great, especially considering how much work James is putting into editing those, and we go into to obviously film them. It's hard enough to hunt and target these mature bucks or red deer and stuff like that, as you can imagine, let alone to obviously try and film it and share it with you guys. So we have a bit of a goal that we want to try and get to 25,000 subscribers in the next month or two. So we would really appreciate if you guys share the channel with a friend. If you like what we do, share it on your stories, help us share that we're dropping a film. All of that type of stuff definitely helps when it comes to growing our YouTube channel.
As usual, we would ask you to jump on and like, rate and review the podcast, share it with a friend. There's obviously a lot that goes into planning, preparing and editing these as well. And we do try and give you guys as much detail and information as we possibly can. We're sharing our tips and tricks, like everything that we've spent years learning, we throw into these podcasts for free for you guys to hopefully improve your chance on the mountain. So if you guys can share it with a friend, like and rate it on whatever platform you guys listen to your podcast, we'd really appreciate it, because that helps it get shared and suggested to other people so they can continue to learn as well and hopefully increase their chances of being successful on the mountain. But from Ayden and I, thank you very much for listening to another episode, and we'll catch you next week on the Twin Elements podcast.